Good morning. Contrary to some rumors I heard before this talk, the title of this talk is not derived from the Arnold Schwarzenegger movie of the same title. But anyway, my name is Peter Eisentraut. I work for this company there. I was involved in the installation of various large email filter systems for companies and government agencies in Germany. And from those experiences, I also wrote a book about spam and virus filtering. It's not supposed to be an advertisement, so I'm not going to go into details. During this research and the consultancy work, I noticed some things about developments in spam and virus filtering that I really did not like, and I did not find any real thorough treatment on those, so I set out to kind of make my own notes, and this talk is sort of the byproduct of that research. So this is where we are today. It happens to be that this is the year 12 of spam, if you believe the legends that the first spam was sent in 1994 on Usenet. And this is also the year 24 of the SMTP era, based on the publication of the first RFC on SMTP. So if you count that up, then you can see that pretty much from now on, for more than half of its lifetime, email has been hampered by a spam problem. But if you think about it, just SMTP is no longer email. You cannot no longer just take an SMTP implementation and put it on the internet and hope to communicate reasonably with other people. There is now, on top of that, an additional layer of spam filter system, virus filter system, all kinds of other defense mechanisms that are essentially de facto part of the email system nowadays. Everybody has them, but contrary to SMTP and other standards, those filter systems are not standardized by anyone. Everyone can implement their own and do what they like. They're not verified by anyone. There's no accountancy of what you're doing. Most of the time, usually they're not even announced that they're there. So you tell people, send me email to this email address, and you say, okay, this guy probably has an SMTP server at that email address, but they're not going to tell you how they filter your email. So you really have a hard time getting your email through. And even worse, most of these filter systems are completely unpredictable by both the sender and the receiver. They consult external lists, and they have behavior changing over time based on statistical filter system, on all these things that you know. So really today, getting email through is a challenge. And this talk is about why that is and what I think about that. So here are a couple of filtering techniques that people have used or that people are considering right now that I find questionable. Some of them are kind of obvious if you know them, but some of them you might wonder why they are here, and I'm going to explain why they are here. The second part of this talk is a couple of legal issues that are also of concern to me. But first, the technical side. So the DNS black hole list, everybody knows them. They are sort of the first technique specifically invented to fight spam. The way this works is you collect a list of problem hosts respective to your problem, and your problem is fighting spam or viruses. So you collect hosts that you think have a spam problem, and you publish that list somehow on the internet. And you can imagine other ways to publish these lists, but for some reason they chose to publish that via the domain name system. And every mail server on the internet can query those lists, and if a host is listed, then according to the theory, you can just block email from that host. Now, in the beginning, this was sort of reasonable. The first DNS black hole list was the MAPS RBL. And they had a very conservative policy. They did inspections all manually, and they tried to contact the offending, the host master of the offending site, and try to explain the problem. And then if they did not react in a reasonable way, they ended up being listed. And that was reasonable. In those days, most of the people on the internet used SendMail, and SendMail back in those days was by default configured as an open relay, so there was a lot of open relays on the internet being abused to send spam. And so the MAPS RBL was sort of as much a spam fighting mechanism as much as an education program to educate people about the problem of open relays. And the open relay problem nowadays is pretty much gone. Even SendMail and all the other MTAs that you use have safe default configuration, more or less. And if you have an open relay or a related problem, you really got there on purpose. The spam problem nowadays is zombies. Most of spam is nowadays sent through zombies. I've heard figures about 80% or more. And this is only going to get worse. Zombies are hosts, just regular dial-up PCs that are taken over by a virus and are commanded by whoever wants to send junk email. And nowadays it's impossible to do manual inspections just because of the sheer volume. The internet has grown a lot over the last 10 years, and that's why most of the DNS black hole lists nowadays are fully automated. There are some where you can actually, everything you submit is automatically listed, and everything you nominate for deletion is automatically deleted. So that's particularly bad. Some of them do. Most of them actually do some kind of testing. They do some kind of relay testing. They send out an email, and if they get it back, then you get listed. So that's the situation. Why is that a problem? The problem with these things is that they do not discriminate between temporary problems and permanent problems, or between ill will, if you like. And for that reason, even if you just have a problem of 5 minutes and you get tested during that time, then you might be listed and you cannot get off that list, or you don't even know that you're listed, or it might take you weeks to get off a list, or you might even have to pay for that. And probably for reasons related to that, or for whatever other reasons, large ISPs get regularly blocked by these lists. I know in Germany GMX is blocked by everybody. For reasons I don't understand. I mean, they have smart people there probably too. But as I said, most of the spam is nowadays not sent through regular email servers that are open relays or have some problem of that sort, but instead they're sent through zombies on dial-up accounts. And tracking dial-up accounts through a DNS-based listing system is more or less useless because first of all, most dial-up users dial in again every day, every 24 hours, and never get a new IP address. And on top of that, DNS has a propagation delay of about 24 hours. So most of your data, and if you choose to track dial-up accounts at all in your DNS black hole list, then most of the data in there is just out of date by 24 hours on average. Or if you do not track dial-up accounts in your list, then you miss out on, if you believe my numbers, 80% of your spam problems. So really what this comes down to is that DNS black hole lists nowadays have a low correlation with the actual occurrence of spam or junk email. Meaning both not exactly all of your listings are a spam problem, because you just list them because of some configuration problem that may or may not actually result in spam occurrence. And on the other hand, you also miss a lot of spam sources on these dial-up accounts. So you really have both a high false positive and a high false negative rate, and that is really the worst combination. On top of that, DNS as a protocol, as a distribution mechanism for information is pretty insecure. I don't want to get into the detail of that. There are entire conferences on why DNS is insecure and what to do about that. It is, in a way, it's amazing that this has not become a problem really in large scale. But you can imagine all kinds of attacks, denial of service attacks, or adding or removing information on these lists by just hacking into DNS. So my opinion on all this is that using DNS black hole lists in the original way, if it's listed, then you just block the communication with that host altogether. That is completely inappropriate today. DNS black hole lists do remain useful in a sort of secondary way. You can use them in some sort of a weighted scoring system like Spam Assassin has, where a listing gets like 1 point or a low point percentage of the entire points that you need to block an email. I guess they're still useful in that way to figure in with all these other spam filter mechanisms that you have, but by themselves, I think they're entirely inappropriate and will get even more so as the zombie problem continues to grow. The second problem, and I think everybody has experienced that, bounce messages gone wild. Why is that? This is the, on top you see the original concept of how email was supposed to work. So first host A wants to send a message to host B. And then host B checks the message if it likes it. And this usually involves at least checking the recipient address to see if it's a local user or if it's an unauthorized relay attempt. And then host B says either it accepts the message and sends it to the final destination, or it rejects the message. And then host A can react to that rejection and in turn inform the user and that the message did not get through. The problem with that is that as you add spam filters, virus filters, or what have you in step 2, the checking keeps taking longer and longer, and then host A starts to time out so you don't get any email through at all. So what people did, they thought up this new concept down there. Host A sends a message to host B, and then host B does little or no checking at all. They still check for unauthorized relay attempts usually, but that's really all they do, and then they put the message in the queue, and then the so-called after queue filtering, they check the message whenever they want later on when the load is low, or forward it to a different host and do the checking there in a sort of parallelized fashion. And then when host B or the cluster nodes behind them decide that the message is unacceptable, they supposedly send a rejection message to the sender, but if you know the email protocols at all, there's now no chance at all anymore to actually know who the sender was. So this does not work. So as you all know, all junk email fakes standard addresses. So all these rejection messages go to innocent users, so there's a 100% failure rate of this mechanism. And in addition to that, users are now starting, or have already started a while ago, to actually reject rejection messages, filter rejection messages as a sort of spam on their own part. I know, well, there's different ways to do that. I know some people who actually just reject all bounce messages completely, and that, of course, reduces the reliability of the whole email system dramatically. I have thought of my own way, which only works on my own host, and you probably have figured out too how you can filter your email, your bounce messages from your email. But it's really hard to do in general. So what do you do, going back to this, what do you do if you do not want to send a rejection message in step 3 down there? There's alternatives. Well, you can just discard all the messages you don't like. That, of course, reduces the reliability of the email system. Also, you can do that on your private server, I guess, but if you are responsible for an ISP or an organization, then that's, of course, inappropriate. A quarantine system where you keep the email in a sort of separate mailbox, and if it turns out that the filter system got it wrong, you can still get it out of there. That works reasonably well in balance. If you have a sort of a limited user population, then this is manageable. But if you're just a large ISP, then you can't just, keep a quarantine for all your users and have, a staff of dozens of people manage the quarantine. There's also privacy issues with that too. So what to do? Well, fix the MTA timeouts. That's what I would suggest doing, and that is actually possible. Because most of the time the MTA is not your Outlook client, which you obviously cannot fix, but it's some sort of a different, it's a different MTA which forwards it to the next MTA. And that one you can, of course, configure, or if it's open source, you can just fix the code, or that is easily doable. The other problem, and it actually is the worst problem here, is that the spam filter, most spam filter software is just terribly implemented and has, has loads of features, it's bloatware, and it's poorly implemented in terms of performance and scalability. And that's why these timeouts happen that I talked about here. So what I suggest we tackle in the near future is just fixing filter programs for performance. We have now pretty much, in the last couple of years, we got a new filter technique every other week, so we kept adding on to that and added new